Three major stories have made headlines in the past 10 days. Each tells its own story, but their real power emerges when you see them side by side. First, the Horizon Post Office Inquiry. Sir Wyn Williams reveals a tragic toll, lives lost after innocent people were wrongly accused by the organization they worked for. Second, the Court of Appeal quashes the last convictions tied to corrupt police officer Derek Ridgewell, men framed, decades ago, simply for being young and black. And third, the government announces a 30% uplift to compensation for the wrongfully convicted. What do these stories have in common? What do they tell us about trust, power, and betrayal? Stay with us to the end. Because when you connect these dots, the picture that emerges is bigger and more disturbing than any single headline.
Welcome to Spoken Injustice, where we put the criminal justice system in the dock. Today we return to the heart of what drives this channel: personal stories. Legal discussion, policy debates and calls for reform are important, but they can't exist in a vacuum. At the core of every wrongful conviction is a human being whose life has been irreversibly changed. It's the personal impact, the pain, the loss, the broken trust that must shape how we talk about justice and, more importantly, how we act. On the 8th of July 2025, Sir Wyn Williams released Volume 1 of the final report from the Post Office Horizon IT Inquiry. He opened the report with a stark declaration.
The whole length of the inquiry, I have received written evidence and other sources of information about the nature and scale of the human impact visited upon so many. The picture which has emerged is profoundly disturbing.
And it is. 13 people lost to suicide. 59 more say they have contemplated ending their lives. 19 who said they abuse alcohol. A number of persons said they could not sleep at night without drinking first. It is also possible, he said, that more than 13 persons died by suicide, but that some deaths have not been reported to the Post Office or the inquiry. These aren't statistics. They are stories of shattered trust, unbearable shame, and systems that turned against the very people they were meant to protect. The report is also a powerful reminder that the direction of any inquiry depends entirely on the person leading it. He could have taken the cold clinical route, focused purely on legal definitions and procedural facts, much like Lady Thirlwall. He could have sidelined the human cost, brushing aside the families who say that 13 people took their own lives as a result of this scandal as mere noise. But he didn't. Instead, Sir Wyn chose sympathy and truth. While he made no individual findings on each suicide mentioned in section 3 of his report, he did something equally important. He listened. He absorbed testimony not just as a judge, but as a human being. Drawing on his experience as both a barrister and a judge, Sir Wyn Williams offers a powerful insight into the lived reality of wrongful convictions, from the very first interview under caution through to charge and prosecution and beyond. His report captures the psychological trauma, the overwhelming sense of isolation, and the slow, painful erosion of a person's sanity. It's not surprise that Sir Wyn Williams, in outlining 17 case studies to illustrate the strongest foundations for the scandal's devastating consequences, begins with Mr. Griffiths' story, which remains one of the most tragic and disturbing examples of the human cost behind the post office scandal. As many of you will already know, Mr. Griffiths was a sub-postmaster, honest, hard-working, and like so many others, swept up in the nightmare of the Post Office Horizon scandal. In 2009, he started seeing unexplained shortfalls in his branch's accounts. These happened just as Horizon Online was rolled out. He asked the post office for help, but got none. Instead of support, he was met with suspicion, interviewed multiple times, and eventually suspended without pay. Then, in May 2013, a robbery took place at his branch. He was injured, but instead of receiving care, the post office blamed him. An internal investigator claimed he was partly responsible for the £38,000 loss. Just weeks later, Mr. Griffiths was told his contract would be terminated. And then the unthinkable. On the 23rd of September 2013, 1 month before his termination was due to take effect, Mr. Griffiths deliberately walked in front of a moving bus. He suffered multiple injuries. He was put on life support, but on the 11th of October, he died. He was only 59. The post office later offered his widow £140,000, but only if she signed a non-disclosure agreement. Internal documents revealed that the money will be paid in stages and only if she stayed silent. During the inquiry, lead counsel Jason Beer KC put it bluntly, this was harsh money, wasn't it?
On the 23rd of September 2013, the day that Mr. Griffiths walked in front of a bus, at 5:02 p.m, Mr. Alan Bates emailed Paula Venables, Susan Crichton, you and Andy Holt, copied to some other people, including Mr. Arbuthnot and Joe Swinson, with the subject, Post Office, read this. I'm writing on behalf of my son-in-law, Martin Griffiths, who's recently been in touch with you about the treatment doled out to him by the hierarchy at the Crown Office in Chester. He had an armed raid in May, and the faceless wonders at the Crown Office have intimated he was culpable. Had him at the Kangaroo Court, where he was not allowed any representation of his own. He was a broken man then. However, he was sent for last Friday to attend a meeting with the Crown Post Office personnel again, and all week he has clearly not been himself. This morning he drove off to work, got out of his car and walked in front of a bus. He's dangerously ill in hospital at Liverpool. The post office had driven him to suicide. Susan, given the potential media element, please can we line up a specialist media lawyer in case we need urgent advice this evening? So the immediate reaction, you agree, was not, is Martin Griffiths all right? What about his health? Was it?
Not at this point in this email chain, no.
The immediate reaction was not, what can we, the post office, do to help this man's family, was it?
Not at this point.
What about his wife and his children? What about his elderly parents? What about his sister? Should we get somebody down to the hospital? That didn't happen, did it?
Not getting somebody down to the hospital.
No, the first thing was, let's get a media lawyer. I think this is a draft letter that you prepared for sending to Mr. Griffiths' widow, Gina, yes?
Yes.
And if we scroll down, you say Martin was not eligible for a network transformation levers payment. He'd been served 3 months' notice of contract termination. In recognition of his service, the Post Office would like to offer you a discretionary payment in the sum of £140,000. That's equivalent to the sum offered to sub-postmasters who choose to leave.
Yes.
I note you've made an application on behalf of your husband to the initial complaint review and mediation scheme. When a discretionary payment is offered, the normal process is for it to be made in full and final settlement of any claims that a sub-postmaster had against Post Office Limited. You'll note from paragraph 2.1 that Mrs. Griffiths has agreed to stage payments, which we asked for as an incentive to Mrs. Griffiths, maintaining confidentiality. As drafted, if Mrs. Griffiths were to breach confidentiality, we could stop any further payments, but not recoup sums already made. Please let me know if you'd like the agreement to be amended to give us that right. Mr. Williams is saying that the provision in the agreement for stage payments to Mrs. Griffiths were included as an incentive to her to maintain confidentiality. That was important for the Post Office, wasn't it? This is about the Post Office staging payments to act as an incentive to her. A sword of Damocles hanging above her head. You don't get any more money unless you keep quiet.
So
that's what this is.
This wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. This was a man broken by the very system he served, and a widow told to suffer in silence. This is what it means when justice fails. And this is why human impact must always be at the centre of any conversation about reform. If the Post Office scandal laid bare the failures of corporate powers, there are other stories that reveal how a single individual, armed with the authority of the state, can be just as destructive. What follows is one such story, the case of a corrupt police officer whose actions led to the wrongful imprisonment of dozens of innocent men, most of them young and black. And all the while, the justice system turned away for more than 40 years. This is the story of Detective Sergeant Ridgewell and how he fooled the courts, destroyed lives, and exposed the rot of the heart of British policing. Derek Ridgewell was a British transport police officer operating in the 1970s. On paper, he was fighting crime. In reality, he was planting evidence, falsifying statements, and framing innocent people, often young black men travelling through London. He operated without fear of being caught because the system trusted him, and worse, the courts believed him. His victims included men like Winston True, Sterling Christie, George Griffiths, and Constantine Butcher of the Oval Fall, as well as Ronald de Sousa, Paul Green, Courtney Harriott, Cleveland Davison, Texo Johnson, and Everett Mullins of the Stockwell Six, all arrested, charged and convicted in 1972 based solely on Ridgewell's word. Errol Campbell suffered the same fate in 1977. There was no real evidence, just his testimony and systemic bias that saw young black men as easy targets. These weren't one-off mistakes. This was a calculated abuse of power. Many of Ridgewell's victims spent years in prison. Some had their lives completely destroyed, careers lost, families broken, reputations ruined. And for decades, no one listened. It wasn't until recently that the truth finally began to surface, and as a result, the Court of Appeal between 2019 and 2024 quashed the wrongful convictions of the Oval 4 and the Stockwell 6. The last two of the known victims of Officer Ridgewell were cleared by the Court of Appeal last week on the 17th of July 2025. These were Ronald De Souza, the last member of the Stockwell 6, and Errol Campbell. Judges acknowledged these were gross miscarriages of justice directly caused by Ridgewell's lies. But for many, justice came far too late. Some victims, like Errol Campbell, had already passed away. Others lived for decades under the shadow of a conviction that never should have happened. Errol Campbell's son's statement was read by Matt Foote, Director of Appeal, outside the Court of Appeal at the end of the hearing.
Clear his name. Clear my father's name.
I'm going to read a statement from Errol Campbell Jr., the son of Errol Campbell. The British Transport Police knew that Detective Sergeant Derek Ridgewell was corrupt, and they let him carry on regardless. The conviction caused absolute misery to my dad and our family. Due to the shame and disgrace of this conviction, he found it difficult to get employment, so much so that he fled the country. On his return, he became an alcoholic and couldn't hold down a lollipop man's job. Before this, he was a great family man and looked after us as children, and he was dapper. He was a good man. I'm angry that Ridgewell is not alive for this day and that he never went to prison for all the people he fitted up. He never answered for his crimes.
Matt Foote also emphasised that this goes beyond the actions of a single corrupt officer. It highlights how the system enabled him to act without oversight or accountability.
British Transport Police still have questions to answer. We do not know who made those decisions still today. They have not been held to account. The people who took him into the headquarters and who pushed him back out on duty have never been named, have never been held to account. And the media who are here today need to be asking those questions.
Ridgewell did eventually go to prison, but not for framing innocent people. He was exposed during an unrelated mail theft scheme and died in prison. However, the harm he caused continued long after his death, and the cases he was involved in were never revisited following his conviction. Matt Foote pointed out a significant gap in the law on this issue, and Appeal is calling for a legal reform to address this gap.
We are calling for a change in the law that when a police officer goes to prison, there is an automatic review of their cases to look for miscarriages of justice. If that had happened, that would have saved more than 45 years of misery for the Campbell family.
Both the post office scandal and the Ridgewell scandal raise urgent questions. What do these stories say about a system that allows one officer, one organization to operate unchecked? We are taught to trust institutions, the state, the police, our employers, our regulators. But what happens when those very institutions betray that trust, and when checks that are supposed to protect us fail? When there is no transparency, no accountability, and no meaningful review, trust in the justice system doesn't just erode, it collapses. At Spoken Injustice, we believe these stories must be heard, not buried, because these aren't just the echoes of the past. They are warnings, and they are still happening. until we understand where the safeguards are failing, whether at trial, the Court of Appeal, or at the doors of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, we cannot begin to prevent future miscarriages of justice. Without true accountability, the system will not change, and injustice will remain quietly tolerated. What we see in the post office scandal, in the Ridgewell cases, is that cover-ups and corruption don't require a grand conspiracy. Sometimes all it takes is an institution desperate to protect its own image, or a system too proud to admit it was wrong. However, the impact on human lives is immense. The damage is never confined to courtrooms. The fallout extends to the families, the wives, the husbands, children, parents who live through the consequences. People like Mr. Griffiths' widow, who was silenced with staged payments, or Mr. Campbell's son, who had to watch his father's life unravel, driven to alcoholism by the weight of betrayal and shattered trust. As Sir Wyn Williams rightly noted, these families often face not just trauma, but public abuse, shunned by communities who believe the false convictions. The devastation runs deep, and no amount of money can truly fix it. So how do we begin to repair what's been broken? Restorative justice offers one way forward, not simply through compensation, but through acknowledgement, apology, and redress. It's about treating a wrongful conviction as a deeply personal harm, not just a legal error. And we are glad to see this concept reflected in Sir Wyn Williams' report, thanks to advocates like Mr. Staines KC and Mr. Maloney KC. Restorative justice calls for real support, psychiatric care, the restoration of reputation, and crucially, an end to the quiet stigma that follows even those who have been fully exonerated. It is in this context that the government's recent announcement that it will raise the compensation cap for miscarriages of justice by 30% feels hollow, almost mocking. The tone was celebratory, but the reality is bleak. Many victims, like those in the post office scandal, are still waiting for compensation years after being cleared. Others, like Brian Buckle, haven't received a penny. Mr. Markinson, who has also only received partial compensation, having been exonerated since 2023, reacting to the news said, "The state stole years of my life and robbed me of my physical and mental health. Yet it still wants to arbitrarily limit the compensation I receive. I'll keep fighting to abolish this cruel and arbitrary cap." It's worth pausing here for a moment to reaffirm our support for Mr. Markinson and Appeal's campaign to abolish the unjust rule that forces wrongfully convicted individuals to prove their innocence beyond reasonable doubt in order to receive compensation, only compounding their moral injury. You will find the link to our original appeal and to Appeal's campaign page in the description below. The road to justice doesn't end at quashing a conviction. It runs from prevention at the point of a trial to remedy through appeals and the CCRC, and through the full restoration and accountability for those responsible. The truth is, none of this is new. But seeing all of these stories, from Horizon to Ridgewell to the fight for fair compensation, unfolded in the last 10 days lays bare just how deeply rooted and systemic this problem is. Until we face it, it will continue to claim lives, trust, and futures. And that is why we keep speaking up. Individually, each of these stories is shocking, but read together, they reveal something deeper and far more disturbing. Not just isolated failures, but a pattern of power abused, of institutions shielding themselves, of ordinary people paying the price. What unites them isn't just injustice. It's how long it was allowed to continue, how many looked the other way, and how hard the truth had to fight to be heard. This isn't just about the past. It's about what kind of system we continue to accept. And that question, uncomfortable as it may be, is exactly where our attention belongs. I hope you found this video worth your time. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What stood out most? What questions are still lingering? And as usual, my discreet call for you to subscribe to this channel, if you haven't done so already, to support our mission to humanize the criminal justice system. And don't forget to like and share this content. Join us again as we sit and rise in this unique trial.